Hello, Ma. I'm Jennifer. My number is 47. And now I'm going to read this week's article from the opinion pages of an contributor. A Sister's Eulogy for Steve Jobs by Mona Simpson, October 30, 2011. I grew up as an only child with a single mother. Because we were poor, and because I knew my father had immigrated from Syria, I imagined he would like Omar Sharif. I hoped he would be rich and kind, and would come into our lives. And all 9 years furnished apartment and help us. Later, as I met my father, I tried to believe he'd change his number, and that no forward in address because he was an idealistic revolutionary. Plotting a new world for Arab people. Even as a feminist, my whole life I have been waiting for a man to love, who could love me. For decades, I thought that man would be my father. When I was 25, I met that man, and he was my brother. By then, I lived in New York, where I was trying to write my first novel. I had a job at a small magazine in the office the size of a closet, with 3 other aspiring writers. When one day, a lawyer called me, a middle-class girl from California, who had sold a bus to buy us health insurance, and said his client was rich and famous and was my long-lost brother. The young editors went wild. This was 1985, and we worked at a cutting-edge literary magazine. But I'd fallen into the plot of a Dickens novel, and really, we all loved those days. The lawyer refused to tell me my brother's name, and my colleagues started a betting pool. The leading candidate, John Travolta, I secretly hoped for a literary descendant of Henry James, someone more talented than I, someone brilliant without even trying. When I met Steve, he was a guy my age in jeans, Arab or Jewish looking, and handsomer than Omar Sharif. We took a long walk. Something, it happened, that we both liked to do. I don't remember much of what we said that first day, only that he felt like someone I picked to be a friend. He explained that he worked in computers. I didn't know much about computers. I still worked on a manual operated typewriter. I told Steve I recently considered my first purchase of a computer, something called the Colemanco. Steve told me it was a good thing I waited. He said he was making something that was going to be insanely useful. I want to tell you a few things I learned from Steve in 3 distinct periods. Over the 27 years I knew him, there are not periods of years, but of state of being. His full life, his illness, his diet. Still working at what he loved. He worked really hard every day. That's incredibly simple, but true. He was the opposite of absent-minded. He was never embarrassed about working hard, even if the results were failures. If someone as smart as Steve wasn't ashamed to admit trying, maybe I didn't have to be. When he got kicked out of Apple, things were painful. He told me about a dinner at which 500 students congratulated him and then 15 presidents. Steve hadn't been invited. He was hurt, but he still went to work and nest every single day. Novelty was not Steve's highest value, beauty was. For an innovator, Steve was remarkably loyal. If he loved a shirt, he'd order 10 or 100 of them. In a Palo Alto house, there are probably enough black cotton turtlenecks for everyone in Bill's church. Gideon Bevel chains or green mix. He liked people his own age. His philosophy of aesthetics reminds me of a quote that went something like this. Fashion is what seems beautiful now but looks ugly later. Art can be ugly at first, but it becomes beautiful later. Steve always aspired to more beautiful later. He was willing to be misunderstood. Uninvited to the ball, he dropped the third or fourth iteration of his Sam Black sports car to Nest, where he and his team were quietly mounting the platform on which Tim Berners-Lee would write a program for the World Wide Web. Steve was like a girl in the amount of time he spent talking about love. Love was his supreme virtue, the god of gods. He tracked and worried about the romantic lives of the people working with him. Whenever he saw a man he thought a woman might find fashion, he called out, "Hey, are you single? Do you wanna come to dinner with my sister?" I remember when he phoned the day he married Lauren. "There's this beautiful woman, and she's really smart, and she has this dog, and I'm going to marry her." When Reed was born, he began gushing and never stopped. He was a physical dad with each of his children. He fretted over Lisa's boyfriends and Erwin's travel and skirt lengths and his safety around horse vehicles. None of us who attended Reed's graduation party will ever forget the scene of Reed and Steve's slow dancing. His abiding love for Lauren sustained him. He believed that love happened all the time, everywhere. In that most important way, Steve was never ironic, never cynical, never pessimistic. I try to learn from that Steve. Steve had been successful at a young age, and he felt that had isolated him. Most of the choices he made from the time I knew him were designed to dissolve the world around him. A middle-class boy from Los Altos, he fell in love with a middle-class girl from New Jersey. It was important to both of them to raise Lisa, Reed, Erwin, and Eve as grounded, normal children. Their house didn't intimidate with art or polish. In fact, for many of the first years I knew Steve and Lo together, dinner was served on the grass, and sometimes consisted of just one vegetable. Lots of that one vegetable. The one, broccoli, in season. simply prepared with just a right recently snipped earth. Even as a young millionaire, Steve always picked me up at the airport. He'd be standing there in his jeans. When a family member called him at work, his secretary, Lynetta, answers, Your dad's in a meeting. Would you like me to interrupt him? When Reed insists on dressing up as a witch every Halloween, Steve, Lauren, Alvin, and Eve all went wicked. They once embarked on a kitchen remodel. It took years. They cooked on a hot plate in the garage. The pizza building, under construction during the same period, finished in half the time, and that was it for the Palo Alto house. The bathroom stayed old, but, and this was crucial distinction, it had been a great house to start with, Steve saw to that. This is not to say that he didn't enjoy his success. He enjoyed his success a lot, just minus a few zeros. He told me how much he loved going to the Palo Alto bike store, gleefully realizing that he could afford to buy the best bike there. And he did. Steve was humble. Steve liked to keep learning. Once he told me if he'd grown up differently, he might have become a mathematician. He spoke very to me about college and now working around the Stanford campus. In the last year of his life, he studied a book of painting by Mark Rothko, an artist he hadn't known about before. Thinking of what could inspire people on the walls of a future Apple campus, Steve cultivated himself, like other CEO knows, in the history of English and Chinese tea roses, and has a favorite David Austin rose. And he has surprise tucked in all his pockets. Our venture alone will discover truth. Also, he laughed, upon he cut out and put in a drawer. Even after 20 years of an exceptionally close marriage, I spoke to him every other day or so. So when I opened the New York Times and saw a feature on company's patent, I was still surprised and delighted to see a sketch for a perfect steel cat, with his 4 children, with his wife, with all of us. Steve had a lot of fun. He treasured happiness. Then Steve became ill, and we watched his life compress into a smaller circle. Once he left working to Paris, he discovered a small handmade soba shop in Kyoto. His downhill skied gracefully. He cross-country skied clumsily. No more. Eventually, even ordinary pleasures like a good pitch no longer appealed to him. Yet, what amazed me, and what I learned from his illness, was how much was still left after so much had been taken away. I remember my brother learning to walk again with a chair. after his liver transplant. Once a day he would get up on bed, lifting 2 feet for him, arms pitched to the chair bed. He put your chair down, lamented hospital provided towards the nursing station, and then he sit down on a chair, rest, turn around and walk again. He counted his steps, and each day pressed it a little farther. Laurie got down on her knees and looked into his eyes. "You can believe this," and she said. His eyes widened, his lips pressed into each other. He tried. He always tried, and always would not at the core of that act. He was an intensely emotional man. I realized during that terrifying time that Steve was not enduring the pain for himself. He set destination. His son reached graduation from high school. His daughter Evan trip to Kyoto. Unsure for both, he was building on which he planned to take his family around the world, and where he hoped he and Nolan would someday retire. Even ill, his tact, his discrimination, and his judgment held. He went through 6 P7 nurses before finding country spirit, and then he completely trusted the 3 who stayed with him to the end. Tracy, Arturo, Elham. He was in the ICU unit. He generally disliked being alone or talking with someone. Steve, this is special treatment. He leaned over to me. And said, I want it to be a little more special. Interpreted. When he couldn't talk, he asked for a notepad, sketched devices to hold an iPad in a hospital bed. He designed new fluid monitors and X-ray equipment. He withdrew an not quite special enough hospital unit, and every time his wife walked into the room, I watched his smile remark itself on his face. For a really big deal. Pat, he looked up. You have to. By that he meant that we should disobey the doctors and give him a piece of ice. None of us knows for certain how long we'll be here on Steve's better days. Even in the last year, he embarked upon projects and listed promises from his friends at Apple to finish them. Some boat builders in the Netherlands have a gorgeous stainless steel hull ready to be covered with the finishing wood. His 3 daughters remain unmarried. His 2 youngest still girls, and he wanted to walk them down the aisle as he walked me the day of my wedding. We all, in the end, died in media res, in the middle of a story, of many stories. I suppose it's not quite accurate to call the death of someone who lived with cancer for years unexpected, but Steve's death was unexpected for us. What I learned from my brother's death was that character is essential. What he was how he died. Tuesday morning, he called me to ask me to hurry up to Palo Alto. His tone was affectionate, dear, loving, but like someone whose luggage was already strapped onto the vehicle, who was already on the beginning of his journey, even as he was sorry, truly deeply sorry, to be leaving us. He started his farewell, and I stopped him. I said, "Wait, I'm coming. I'm in a taxi to the airport. I'll be late. I'm telling you now because I'm afraid you won't make it on time, honey." When I arrived, he and his Noreen were joking together like partners who live and work together every day of their lives. He looked into his children's eyes as if he couldn't unlock his gaze. Until about 2 in the afternoon, his wife could rouse him to talk to his friend from Apple. Then, after a while, it was clear that he would no longer wake to us. His breathing changed. It became severe, deliberate, purposeful. I could feel him counting his steps again, pushing farther than before. This is what I learned. He was working at least 2. That didn't happen to Steve. He achieved it. He told me when he was saying goodbye and tell me he was sorry, so sorry we wouldn't be able to be all together as we always planned, that he was going to a better place. Dr. Fisher gave him a 50-50 chance of making it through the night. He made it through the night. Lying next to him on the bed sometimes jerked up when there was a longer pause between his breaths. She and I looked at each other. Then he would have a deep breath and begin again. This had to be done even though he had a stern, still handsome profile, the profile of an absolutist, a romantic. His breath indicated an arduous journey, some steep path altitude. He seemed to be climbing, but with that will, that work ethic, that strength, there was also sweet capacity for wonderment. The artist believed in the idea, and still more beautiful latter. Steve's final words, hours earlier, were monosyllables, repeated 3 times. Before embarking, he looked at his sister Patty, then for a long time at his children, then at his life's partner, Laurie, and then over their shoulders past them. Steve's final words were, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow." Mona Simpson is a novelist and a professor of English at the University of California, Los Angeles since 1988. She had held the Thaddeus Samuelson Davey Chair in Languages and Literature at Bard College. She delivered the eulogy for her brother, Steve Jobs, on October 13, 2011, at his memorial service at the Memorial Church of Stanford University. As in opinion, it is, in fact, rocket science. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you. Bye bye.